Good afternoon. Welcome to yet again reading and conversation with Red Hen Press this afternoon or this evening if you are on the East Coast. We're very delighted to have with us this afternoon Aimee Lou with Glorious Boy and Donna Hemans with Tea by the Sea, two amazing authors with two amazing books. Both of these books have to do with women who go searching for their children, something that many women are doing in this very country, women whose children were taken away from them at the border and who want to get those children back. So these books ended up being books about the time in which we live. But women across time have searched for their children. And these books, though, are so beautifully written, so beautifully crafted that women everywhere are going to want to read these books. So without further ado, let me introduce you to the wonderful Donna Hemans.
Hi, thanks, Kate. So I'm going to read an excerpt from Tea by the Sea. And basically, this book is about a young mother whose child is taken from her at birth. And she spends 17 years searching for this child. And so the section I'll begin reading from is where she actually discovers finally where the child should be or where the child's father is. Brooklyn, East 33rd Street. The air was a little bit cooler and smelled of rain. Plum-polished windows, both the inner and outer sides of the glass, with a crumpled newspaper and a mixture of vinegar, lime, and water. She whistled, thinking at the same time of the uselessness of her chore, polishing the exterior windows when rain had set up to fall. But she didn't stop, simply moved her arms like a wound-up doll powerless to stop itself. Behind Plum were her girls, Nia and Vivian, 7-year-old twins, one doing cartwheels, the other watching, both girls lingering really and waiting for Plum to finish and turn to them. They were clingy girls, or perhaps it was the other way. Plum was an overprotective mother, preferring to have her girls with her, underfoot, within reach. Except for work, she didn't leave them. All these years, she hadn't been able to shake the fear that her girls wouldn't be there when she returned. But they were there, Nia, the acrobatic one, contorting her body through the air, and Vivian, a quiet observer with a book on her lap, stealing glances at Nia. Nia took risks. Vivian weighed consequences. Together, the girls balanced each other, and often when Plum imagined them older, as teenagers, she saw Nia treating life like a tightrope and Vivian holding the net beneath her sister. Even if Alan had been home at that very moment, the girls would still have been nearby waiting for Plum to finish and turn to them. Nia stumbled and crashed, and Plum turned to see her sprawled on the hardwood between the coffee table and the couch, water from a cup pooling, magazines from the rack scattered on the ground like shattered glass, and the storage bench flipped over on its side. "You all right? Where did you hit? Did you hit your head?" Nia, giggling instead of talking, looked at her sister and the pool of water spreading fast toward the rug. Vivian laughed too, their laughter loud, uncontrollable. Plum moved her daughter's shoulders and arms, watching for a wince, waiting for a shiver of pain, but again got only uncontrollable giggles. "Enough of the cartwheels." She was trying to flip onto the bench and back down, Vivian said. "Enough." Plum hadn't heard their discussion at all, hadn't heard the usual, "Watch me." Plum shook her head, moved toward the spreading pool, newspaper in hand, and layered it on top of the water, sheet by sheet, and drew her breath. It was a hiccup, really. She looked again, closer this time, back bent, water dripping from one half of the newsprint. She ripped the sheet in half, dropped the wet half to the floor, then moved toward the window, sheet in hand, for a closer look in the natural light. Unmistakable. Lenworth. She hadn't forgotten the face, the half smile, the thick brows, the thin nose. Below the photo, a caption with his name and his title, Priest. Unmistakably him. Outside, the rain that had set up came with force, pummeling the plants that had withstood summer, and flooding the gutters and the nearly empty roads. The wind whipped the rain around, sprinkling raindrops against the windows like pebbles on glass. East 33rd Street was otherwise quiet, with everyone, it seemed, hunkered down, waiting out the mid-afternoon downpour in place. Plum waited out the rain just within view of her laughing, cavorting girls. She held the newspaper up, using the pages as a shield from the girls' gaze. At least for the moment, Nia had given up the cartwheels and handstands, and she sat with Vivian playing jacks. Behind the newspaper, Plum's calcified grief, all 17 years of it, broke apart, and tears almost as fierce as the rain dribbled down her cheeks, settling uncomfortably in the corners of her mouth. The girls, absorbed by their game of jacks, didn't pay attention to the sniffles coming from behind the newspaper. Plum could have moved to a quieter room, the windowless bathroom perhaps, to cry unchecked, without worrying about the girls eventually gazing and questioning the reason for her tears. Instead, she chose to remain behind the newspaper, to cry without sound, and let the tears roll down her face. Surely, if she had moved in search of seclusion, one or both of the girls would have followed her, wandering through every room until they found her again and transported their game within her line of sight. Plum wiped her eyes on her sleeve and looked again at the man in the center of the photo, surrounded by a group of community leaders. Other than the hairline that had receded, he was exactly as she remembered him. Thick lips, a deep pink like a painted hibiscus bloom. Thick bushy brows came close to meeting in the center of his face, their fullness like a miniature lead shielding eyes that seemed to capture everything. A thin nose. He was a little thicker, of course, but not significantly so. That didn't matter. What mattered was that the man who had disappeared like a deep-water creature into the depths of the ocean had resurfaced in Brooklyn, skimming the water for a long breath of air. He was within reach, a catch he could finally haul in. But how long before he dipped his head and swam again out of reach? And I'll stop there.
I like man as deep sea creature.
Well, that can be exactly what it is sometimes.
Yes. I love the details of the rain and so on. So if you want to know what's going to happen, you have to buy this book and find out if she's going to find her child. Tea by the Sea. Such a beautiful cover. Yes. So thank you so much for working with us on finding that beautiful cover up. That was very, very well. We're very well found. Thank you so much. So let's welcome next the author of Glorious Boy, Aimee Lou.
Hi there. Okay, so this is Glorious Boy, and I am thrilled to share it with you. It is the story that's set in a very different time period. It begins in 1936 and carries through World War. And it is set, as you can see from the cover, on a remote tropical island. And that's part of the Andaman Islands, which are off the coast of Burma. And the two principal characters in the beginning are Claire and Shep Durant, who are newlyweds. Claire is a young, recently graduated anthropology student from Connecticut, who studied with Margaret Mead's own professor, Ruth Benedict, at Columbia, and is besotted with Margaret Mead and wants to become an anthropologist. And Shep is a young British doctor who has been posted to Port Blair, which is the capital of the Andaman Islands, a very strange place. He's British, born in Shanghai, and the British have a penal colony in the Andamans. That's what Port Blair was founded to be. And by the time they get there, it's more of a regular kind of colonial town outpost, but the history of the penal colony still resonates. And there's lots of different cultures colliding in this place, including Deep in the forest, the Anemones tribes, which date back 60,000 years to the mass migration out of Africa. And they are the reason that Claire wants to go to the Anemons. They're really the reason that she marries Shep, because he gives her a fast track opportunity to go with him to this place and do her own field work in the forest with this tribe that is basically an uncontacted tribe. And so that is the backstory for the this young couple. And they, of course, by the time they get to the Anemons from New York, it turns out that Claire is pregnant. And so the best laid plans go a bit astray. The part that I'm going to read, though, is just to give you an idea of the location. And this is before little Ty, the glorious boy, is born. And it is their first field trip into the forest just a couple of months after they arrive in the Andaman Islands. And so it is the beginning of 1937 in this section. Mosquito boots, bush trousers, topi with netting, field tent, binoculars, insect repellent, snakebite kit, sulfa, tablets, and powder. What did RB take? Shep asked. RB is the one anthropologist who has been to the Andamans before, and he's kind of a hero, mentor in absentia to this young couple. Claire had no idea. There was no field manual for ethnographers, but then their first weekend exploration would hardly qualify as a professional field study. They'd secured a naval launch to take them up the coast. With their servant Leo leading, this would shave the 2-day trek to 2 or 4 hours from the point where they landed. So easy, it seemed like cheating. Excited, Shep asked as they crossed the empty parade ground to the pier. It was that sinister hour before dawn, when trees looked black and water red, and the sky seemed at war with itself. I'm glad we're doing this together, Claire said. You all right? He examined her with concern. For a moment, she wondered if he saw through her. She'd lost weight and often complained that the atabrine he insisted they take against malaria made her feel as sickly as it made them both look. The warning signs screamed, yet she'd admitted nothing, and he'd promised to support her in this work. Now, January was the coolest month, the safest and most bearable for trekking. The duration was what really worried her. 3 days was nothing, she scolded herself, and gestured toward the sky. It's going to be a scorcher. Reynolds, the naval lieutenant in charge of the boat, had a Cockney accent, sun-bleached hair, and a tan that Cesar Romero would envy. He charted every inch of the Andaman coastline, he told them. No one knew the islands better. Then, with a sidelong glance at Leo, secured their packs. Sidelong glance as Leo secured their packs, he muttered that he'd seen enough of the blacks up north to know never to trust one of them. Claire beat a quick retreat, with Leo to the canopied bow, while Shep stayed aft to occupy Reynolds. Fortunately, the lieutenant was a punctual man who obeyed his orders, and as soon as they were off, the noise of the outboard muffled his further remarks. The sun broke through as the launch sped north, past the tricorn bulge of Mount Harriet. As Shep said, a drumlin that only homesick Europeans would think of upgrading to mountain status. And in minutes, the lighthouses on Ross and North Point were behind them. The coastline thickened with mangroves and towering ficus trees, the water turning from celadon to cobalt, and the sand burned so white it seemed to percolate under the brooding sky. Coconut palms lined the beach like sentries as their Indian pilots spouted British names. Kidd Island, Napier Bay, Neil, Havelock. The Union Jack snapped in the sea spray. I forgot to mention that Shep's passion in this trip is the treasure chest of orchids and medicinal plants that grow deep in the forest that have not in 1937 been explored or tested or documented. And so that's what he's really going for. So these are two scientists, basically young scientists, who have the chance of a lifetime in the forest. An hour later, they entered the forest, Leo in his element. Even under their largest pack, his bare feet skipped over vines the size of pythons, shoulders swooped beneath fallen trunks. His close-cropped hair escaped the nettles, twigs, thorns, and creepers that bedeviled Claire and Shep as they stumbled along single file, struggling for footing on the bottomless sponge that passed for ground, for breath in the gaseous heat of decay that seemed to envelop them. A hornbill, like some prehistoric aviator, sailed beneath the canopy. A stream materialized to their right. Emerald green monitor lizards followed their progress, and toads the size of rabbits scuttled between the fern fronds. Gradually, as their eyes adjusted to the viscous light, they began to spot the orchids high in the branches or clinging to trunks, trailing plumes or shooting small explosions of color. Once Shep and Claire got the hang of it, as if mastering a child's game of hidden pictures, they saw them everywhere. A field guide from the settlement library having served as Shep's primer, he managed to identify even from afar the basic contours of lady slippers, dendrobium, giant vanda, and the delicate winged grace of Phalaenopsis. But these were altogether different species from those that grew near the port. Some blooms here were the size of helmets, some transparent as ghosts. A few moved as if breathing, though eventually they realized this was because the stems were covered with ants. Some, even at a distance of several yards, gave off powerful fragrances or stinks. And many, suspended from their host trees by nearly invisible threads, appeared to float in midair. Thanks.
I love that, sort of the journey into the wild. So one of the things that strikes me, particularly with the section both of you are reading from, is that both of your characters, Plum and Claire, started a relationship so young and so hopeful. When Plum met this man that she was in love with, there had to have been an idea that things were going to go well. And obviously Claire and Shep started their relationship off very hopeful. And in Claire's case, she was actually fed a narrative, partly the narrative she wanted to hear, and partly her boyfriend at the time fed her a narrative that he thought she wanted to hear. So can we talk a little bit about that whole idea of the young story and how that changes? I'm very interested in this because I think that one of the things that makes a great novel is that we have people change inside a long relationship, and that's what makes characters change. And obviously, in both of your cases, these relationships don't last for one reason or another. In Shep's case, obviously something happens there, and obviously in Plum's case, he chooses not to stay. So Donna, maybe you want to jump in. There was hope in the beginning of this young relationship. She was particularly young. What do you think actually went wrong with this love?
Well, I think in their case, it was really youthfulness. I don't know that they were truly ready. And, I think it's one of those things that happens to all of us that, you go into something, you're fresh, you're young, you think it's the best thing. And, it might be a few months, it might be a few years in that you realize that it is not quite what you're looking for. But I think that the other thing that also derailed them was that Lenworth wanted, when Lenworth had a very different upbringing, a very different childhood, and there were so many things that happened in his childhood that also affected the way in which that affected his outlook on life. He grew up with a mother and a younger sister who had children, I think, relatively young as well, and who were not supported by the fathers of those children. And what he realized was that when Plum got pregnant so young, that she would likely have the same kind of a life as his mother and sister. And what he saw, the kind of life that they had lived and how difficult it was for them to move forward in any way, shape, or form, he didn't want to see Plum have the same experience. So I think that he wanted to do something good for her. It may not necessarily have been the best way to go about doing it. And
to say the least.
yeah, he could have done something a little bit different. But yeah, I think it was, he was driven in some ways by good intentions, but not necessarily going about it the right way.
Well, and you really ask the bigger question of choice. You take the question of choice and make it in a way a bigger question, because we ask this question in this country of whether women get to choose, and you take that question and stretch it to its biggest. Should we get to choose even whether we would make good parents?
Right.
I think we play around with this. Sometimes you'll see parents in the parking lot and you'll think, who got to choose that you got to be a parent? You obviously are not good at this, The fact is, nobody gets to choose that people can procreate, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all get to be parents as long as you can, and it's funny that when you want to adopt, there's all these hoops you have to go through to adopt, but pretty much lots of people can just decide to have children. But he makes a choice for her that she is not going to raise that child.
Right.
And that seems obviously profoundly unfair to the reader and to her, extremely unfair, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they started off with this wonderful young love, and he makes a decision based on his own upbringing that she's not going to be able, or that this is not going to be the best life for that child.
Right. And for Plum, right. So yeah, he does make that decision. And I think one of the things that I wanted to, I guess, really look at and explore is just the whole idea of agency. And in some ways, he had not necessarily the same issue, but he had some opportunities taken away from him.
Right.
And because of that, he really wasn't able to move forward and do a lot of the things that he wanted to do. But I think, in some ways it is just, it goes to a broader question, not just when you look at women or women's rights, but when you look at just so many other things in terms of, various cultures. Who has the right to make choices or make decisions about how any one of us should live? Should we be the ones making that decision for ourselves? And just over and over, I think over the last few years, especially here, you've seen so many examples of agency being taken away from people, women in particular. And I think when you go back and look, like over the last year, the last 2 years, it just feels like it's ramping up as opposed to going in the direction where we were heading before.
Right. So do you think that part of the reason he is making that decision is because he comes from a culture where he feels that his child needs to be raised in a particular way, or because he comes from a family where he feels, in other words, do you think we're influenced more by family or by culture in terms of how we feel our children should be raised?
I think
in your story.
Yeah, in Lenworth's case, I think it's more, I don't think it's culture. And I am not even sure I would even say it was even based on family, because I think he was looking at what was absent for him as opposed to, rather than looking at what he had. So I think, I think it's more absence rather than, emulating what he had and thinking that he would do a better job. Does that?
Yeah. I think that we often try to give our own kids what we think we didn't have ourselves.
Yes.
And not always working out there, but but we do try. Yes. So Aimee, in your case, I was really fascinated how during the courtship, in a way, it seemed to me that Claire was kind of fed a bit of a crock, in the sense that she it falls in love with this doctor, and I think that she felt that he had this kind of plum position, and that she doesn't realize that the reason that has been handed this position is that something has gone wrong.
Right.
And so that's one thing that's interesting, because in a way it feels to me that their life is a little bit built on a lie, or is built on a bit of a lie. And I think that that's always a bit of a problem. It's a great thing to put into a novel, right? Because it already creates a great instability to a story. And so you already have this young couple whose lives are built on instability, and then they're going to go on a slide, and then you put them in a sort of Joseph Conrad like situation where they want to be saviors in some way, and they're in a colonial kind of situation where they would like to help, um, and they're so young. So talk with us a little bit about where you think that young love goes.
Well, I think there are a couple of things. For one thing, they're both keeping secrets when they meet. They had their courtship is such a whirlwind romance. I mean, basically, it's a matter of a couple of weeks before, from meeting to marrying and off on the boat. So there's not a lot of time for deep revelation, and so they keep some convenient secrets that might queer the deal from both of their sides. I would say that, like Lenworth a little bit, Shep is so in love. He's so head over heels about Claire that he is taking advantage of anything that he's got to convince her to come with him. And so when he realizes what allure that he's got, he plays it for all it's worth, and she cooperates very happily with him because she is looking to escape her own past for reasons of her own. I'm not so sure that they're going into the forest, let's just say, to be saviors, as much as they are escaping. She views the Bia people and the anthropological work that she's headed for as entering a time capsule. For her, it's a great escape, a great adventure, a great leaving her whole past behind. And there's, tremendous guilt and shame in her childhood that she's leaving behind. And likewise, Shep, for very different reasons, has a lot of guilt and shame that he's has been laid on him by his very colonial British father in Shanghai. So they're both wounded birds that are looking for escape in this completely unknown, new world. And they're also very young, and they haven't dealt with their histories with any kind of real maturity. And so it's peeling back those layers of the onion and revealing the secrets, and finding themselves in situations that are extremely challenging, to say the least. And they've bit off more than they can chew. There's a line early in the book where Claire is at the Museum of Modern Art with her father before she meets Shep, and they're staring at the Gauguin painting of the Polynesian Madonna and Child, and the women in the painting are bare-breasted, and the Jesus figure is on his mother's shoulders, and it's so blasphemous, and it's so so vivid, and it's so hot, and it's so colorful, and all that Claire's father can think of when he watches that painting is the nerve of Gauguin to escape to Polynesia, to leave civilization and all of his worries and cares behind and go. And so that is part of what Claire brings into this relationship, is this profound moment with her father where she realizes that he feels that his whole life has kind of been a trap, and that he didn't have the nerve to break out of it and live his own life. And so she's got this opportunity, if she can just muster that nerve, to do, kind of what her father never dared to do, and what her father really wants for her. So that's kind of what they're doing when they go off into the wild. And of course, those are great, sort of immature dreams of what it's all going to be like, and reality is much more difficult, and throws, life, fate throws a lot of stones at them as they go, and they have to bend and learn and grow with each flurry or volley of stones.
So both of you have been working with publicists. I'm going to come back to the narratives of your book for a minute, but I want to make sure I get a chance to talk about, exciting things that are happening with your book. Donna, you were talking a little bit before we got started about this. You've both been working with publicists on your books, and you both got some exciting things going on with your book, even during COVID. You guys are rocking it out. Very good. So tell us a little bit about some of the stuff that's been going on. Aimee, maybe your book has just come out, so maybe you can get started. And then Donna, you're next. So Aimee, tell us what's happened so far. You got a couple reviews.
It's never happened to me before. 2-starred reviews right out, before the book is published. And then it's on all of these best of lists. I mean, it's the best historical fiction, best book of the week in New York Post, and it appeared in one of the Smithsonian blogs as a best book. And, it's just, all of that has been incredibly exciting. But I have to say that I've got really wonderful blurbs from people, although I think the best book birthday gift that I got last week was an endorsement from Pico Iyer, who is really one of the writers that I admire, most. I just think he's, really the top caliber. And he wrote of Glorious Boy, he wrote the most memorable and original novel I've read in ages, evokes every side in a multicultural conversation with sympathy and rare understanding. So that was huge. And then when the Publishers Weekly said that the book upends the cliches of the white savior narrative, I was pretty proud of that too. So, we've got a lot of really great stuff going on, and, pieces coming out here and there. And, I'm trying to get the word out to history buffs, because the historical novel readers really seem to be liking this book, as I hoped that they would, because it tells a part of World War II history that I don't think has ever been written about, certainly not in a novel before. So I'm excited to get that. The Andamans were the westernmost front that the Japanese occupied in the war, and had they gone any further, they would have been on the mainland of India. So it actually played a really important role in the war, and it's been very, very badly neglected by historians, I think. So
I know you've started to do some like Zoom book clubs, and I'm assuming both of you guys are available to do some Zoom book clubs. So if anybody's watching this and is a member of a book club and would like Donna or Aimee to be part of your Zoom book club, please just be in touch with Red Hen or be in touch with us. Monica is the publicity person at Red Hen, and can put you in touch with Aimee or with Donna directly, or with their publicity people. But the Zoom book clubs are really fun because you can have all of your book club together, and they can ask questions of the authors directly. So you can have your book club people all buy the book, and then they can discuss the book directly with the author, and it's really fun. So I know Aimee's got one coming up, but Aimee and Donna would love to do this with book clubs across the country. So if any of you are thinking of doing these, they're also doing some book launches at different bookstores, some virtual book launches. I know Aimee's been doing these. Donna, you've got some of these lining up, I'm sure. And so if any of you want to do something like that, let us know. So Donna, what do you have going on?
Well, as you said, I'm a few weeks behind,
Right.
behind Aimee. So my book comes out June 9th. And so there's some things that we have lined up at a pretty strong blog tour. Starting June 1, where, you can find out a lot more information, both about the book, about me, about the various characters, and, and some events, of course, coming up. Aimee and I will be reading and in conversation on June 11th at Hemans, and I believe that's 6 p.m.
So
West Coast time, right? So certainly there are, other events that are coming up, and one of the things, of course, with COVID-19 is that we can't see people in person, but I'm hoping that things will change, things will get better, at least if not later on in the year, sometime next year, that we can again be doing in-person events, because there's so much energy that you get from being in a room with people that you don't get from being on screen. But one of the things that that has been really amazing for me throughout this entire period is just how writers in general have come together to support other writers, how the publishing industry has pivoted in a way that I don't know that many other industries or arts groups or organizations have been able to do. So we have as you said, the Zoom readings, the book club meetings, most of the bookstores have some kind of online or virtual event. And I don't know that most other organizations or most other areas can say the same things. So we have done a lot, and there have been just simply a lot of support from other writers, which has been quite amazing and inspiring.
Yeah, a mighty blaze is incredible. So every Tuesday they have this, treasure chest of new books that are coming out. It's really extraordinary.
Yeah, there's another one that I'm a part of as well called Lockdown Lit. And I mean, they have done quite a number of events. There's a bookstore, I want to say it's Booksmith, if I probably am getting the name wrong, that has has a page dedicated to all the books that are coming out in the spring. That, from authors who have been affected by COVID-19. And I'm just amazed at what we as writers have been able to do to support each other.
Yeah, I'm very excited by how presses have been supporting each other. I mean, Red Hen's been doing events, and we have invited other authors to be part of our events, and it's just been really exciting. Yeah. So I want to get back a little bit to the narratives of your books. So of course, in each of your books, there is a lost child. I don't know if either of you ever watched Eddie Murphy's Delirious. My kids kind of had this whole comedy skit memorized. It's only an hour long when they were kids, but there's a part of it where Eddie Murphy's talking about how there's one child missing, and he's like, it's just one child. Would you miss him? The idea being, if you had several children and you had one child missing, would you miss them? And it's kind of a joke, because I think Eddie Murphy himself has 10 children. And the fact is that no matter how many children you had, even if you had like 20 children, you would miss one, and obviously in each of your families, there's one child. And of course, in the beginning, this mother loses one child, and that's their whole life. And they're going to go and find them. And Donna, in your story, the mother eventually has these twins.
Right.
And she spent very little time with that baby. And she is going to find that baby. She's going to find that baby regardless.
Right.
And so that search just keeps going and going and going. And it's an extraordinary search throughout and until she's, she's determined to find that baby. In Claire's case, you know, it's a different kind of a situation. But still, even in Claire's case, it's going to become it becomes increasingly complicated how she's going to get people she has to get people together. She can't do it alone. So she has to rally forces to go and get the child. And in fact, by the time she gets there, it's very clear that if she had left him there, he would have just become part of that tribe if he had survived. He's not in great health, obviously. Right. And so in each of your cases, you are working with this idea of a core mother love that's going after their child. And so, Donna, talk with me a little bit. Yours is very complicated because your mother goes on, she has twins, she gets married, she's spent only a smidgen of time with her child. What are you working with here? What is this core narrative you're working with here?
Well, I think it's twofold in Plum's case. One is, yes, she wants to find the child, but I think she also wants to understand why Lenworth left her. And I think that is driving the story or driving her search as much as finding the child is. And, certainly at a certain point when she has searched and hasn't found anything, and I believe this is when the child would have been about 8 years old or is about 8 years old, she pulls back a little bit because she is so a little bit discouraged by how long it has taken her to find him. But once she starts looking again, it is again not just finding the child, but understanding why somebody who had declared love for her and somebody who she had known at such a young age would do what he did, because she has no idea, no reason, no understanding at all why he would leave and take the child with her. So, and I think the other part of it for me is what drove the story itself. And so I had, initially had an idea to write a story about a woman who goes to a church and refuses to leave. And so a few weeks after I had written a section where she ended up at the church, I happened to be in Jamaica. And there's a radio program that comes on Sunday evenings where people can call in to get information or to try to find people who they have lost touch with. And on on that particular Sunday when I was there, a woman called in because she was looking for her child. The child at that point, I think, was about 7 or 8 years old. And what she knew was that the father had the child. He had taken the child. She didn't know where they were, had no idea if they were still in Jamaica, if they were here in America, or just simply, she had nothing. And so once I heard that story and I heard that mother's plight, I knew I had the story that I was going to tell. And she was going to, I think, as far as she could get. The woman who I heard on the radio was going as far as she could get to find her child. And I wanted to see, to take that a little bit further with this book, to see exactly how far a mother would go to find a child, even, and in this case, a child that she had known for only one day.
No, that's great. That's great. I mean, it's interesting, even back in the day when there used to be all the kids on milk cartons. Remember the milk carton kids? Almost all of those kids were kids that the other parent had taken. Mm-hmm. And once you knew that, you were less afraid about your own children because, unless you had an ex that was going to take them, because, that those were not strange people abducting kids. Those were the other parents for the most part, as in your story. So Aimee, in your story, Claire, of course, has to go back and find her child. But she wasn't exactly close to the child before.
Right.
And that, of course, is the irony of it. She loved the child, but she didn't completely understand the child before. So talk to us about that, this child that she wasn't exactly bonded to. And that's part of, obviously, in both of your stories. It isn't like this mother and child were completely bonded when the mother goes on the search. That's what's interesting. One of the deeply interesting things with both of these stories. So talk to us.
Well, for openers, I think we've probably failed to mention the fact that the opening incident of the book, which occurs about 5 years after the passage that I read, when little Tai is 4 years old, is that the Japanese are invading the islands, and there's an evacuation, a very rushed and last-minute evacuation of the British and foreign civilians from Port Blair. And during that evacuation, little Tai disappears along with the young girl who takes care of him, who was the servant's daughter when he was born, and has grown up with him and is very, very closely attuned to him. So a lot of my book, thematically, I think if Donna's book is largely about agency, my book is largely about this tension between attunement and attachment. And so when Tai is born, he's a very unusual child, and he has a developmental condition, which it's not really a disorder, but he develops differently than other children do. And he doesn't learn to speak. So he's mute at 4 years old. And as he's grown up in the household, this young girl, Nyla, is really the only one who can understand him. And they are just naturally attuned to each other. They understand each other. They have basically a silent language. And the concept of the silent language runs through the book in different layers. And it is a form of attunement. So the Bia people in the forest have a silent language because they're so attuned to nature and to each other. And it's a different form of communication, which we all have, whether we recognize it or not. But in civilized cultures, that silent language tends to be sort of blocked out by all the verbal languages that swirl around it. So little Tai doesn't have that verbal language. He has the silent language. And Claire, and to a lesser degree, Shep, can't speak. They can't really communicate with him. They haven't bonded with him as closely as little Nyla has with Tai. And that is a source of pain and frustration, and guilt and shame, especially for Claire. And so when the children disappear on the eve of the Japanese occupation, and the family is torn apart, and she is forced to get on the ship and go to Calcutta, and Shep stays there to search for the children, she finds herself alone in Calcutta without her family, without her little boy, and she feels like it's all her fault, which is something that Plum doesn't seem to feel, because naturally everything was done to Plum against her will, whereas Claire had a hand and she knows she had a hand in what happened. And part of that has to do with the fact that she was so conflicted about having a child to begin with, that her passion was to go into the forest and do her anthropological work. So she had the problem of a working mother who really loves her work. She loves her child, but she can't do both at once. And so in that sense, even though it's 1937, she's a very modern mother with some of these problems. And that guilt and that shame and that horror, of course, play into her determination to get her family back, and especially to recover and reclaim and make amends to and with her son. So that's what's going on with Claire in that book.
But if she's going to get him back, though, she's going to have to go through extraordinary measures.
Oh yeah, and she does.
Right.
And right. She does. Yeah.
On
hell or high water.
Right.
Yeah.
On that subject of attunement, he ends up working to help decode radio signals. sort of in her spare time while she's waiting. And that becomes another kind of working on language that you slipped into the book, which I thought was very interesting. So in both of these cases, these women go through these extraordinary searches. In Plum's case, it takes many, many years in terms of going after finding their children. And I think that this kind of long search to find children will resonate with many readers, because I think that many of us see either parent as being willing to go through extraordinary searches to reunite with their children, and obviously you see this with parents at the border, with the border children right now wanting to reunite with their children, and often, of course, not being able to because of extraordinary circumstances. When you were writing this, obviously you didn't know that we would end up in this kind of circumstances here in the US right now. What did you think when you realized we were going to be in this kind of political situation, and we were going to be having this kind of a conversation in this country right now?
I just couldn't imagine. It was a difficult thing for me to accept, and still is a difficult thing for me to accept. It has happened before, but I think, I keep thinking that we have come, as a country, as people, we have come beyond this, and we should be beyond it. So even now it is still happening, but it is still just simply a difficult thing. And I remember earlier on, writing something that, when I, was sitting down thinking about a woman searching for her child, I just never imagined that we would be here. And we have been here for over a year. And I'm still surprised that some people can say that it is okay to take a child from a parent just to prove a point. I don't have any. It's a difficult thing.
Right.
I mean, and to me, because after really reading this book, especially, I mean, it is an act of war. And we are engaged in an undeclared war on innocent people who have committed no violence, who have, are absolutely undeserving of this treatment. And it is as barbaric and cruel and unusual as any act of war in a war zone. So I think we've, it's horrifying to think of what we've done, and without any due process or any justification. It's beyond imagining, actually, or it would have been beyond imagining just a few years ago. Now nothing is beyond imagining, apparently.
One of the things that's strange, not just in our culture, but just culturally, is that there are many children throughout history and throughout time that have grown up without fathers. I mean, that just seems to be, fathers sometimes go off to war, fathers go off to work, fathers sometimes disappear, and sometimes you get another father. I remember being in the hospital when my child was born, and another mother saying to me, don't forget, men come and go, your children are forever. And just those words kind of sinking into me. I was only 24. I was like, what are you saying? But there is something about being left by a mother that is particularly painful, I think. And I think that is in both of your books, you work with that whole idea that being without a mother is particularly, and so in Donna, in your book, I think you really work with that whole idea that for that child, not having a mother is particularly painful, because there are more people who grow up without fathers for various reasons than who grow up without mothers. As someone who grew up without a mother, It's a whole thing. Not having a mother is a whole thing. Or having a mother alive who didn't want to be your mother is a whole thing. I think that both of you did such a good job of working with this. I mean, to me, it's the big thing. The mother, whether or not as a mother you want your children. And in both of your cases, the mothers do want their children. And Claire obviously could have decided, I wasn't a good mom and I'm going to just leave this.
I don't know. I can't imagine her doing that. I mean, there are people who did. I mean, there are people who just walked away in the middle of the war and say, nothing I can do about that. It's
right. But that would have been a different kind of story,
Yeah.
Yeah. So in both of your cases, like, is there something you really wanted your reader to kind of walk away with at the end? Donna, what did you want your reader to walk away with at the end of your book?
I think a lot of what I write over and over, I think I'm writing about belonging. I'm writing about whether it's the question I think I keep asking over and over is, where do you belong? Who or to whom do you belong? And if you walk away from something, or if you leave that place where you feel that is home, or that place where you think you belong, is it going to be there for you when you're ready to return? And I think, just looking at it from the perspective of a mother who isn't or hasn't been able to raise her child, will that child want her when she finds the child, or will she even find the child? And does the child belong to her? And also, I think it also looks at, in some cases, home, physical home. Is home for her Brooklyn, or is home for her Jamaica? So I think in very many ways, that's the idea that I'm playing with across so many of the things that I write.
I love that. Where do we belong?
Thanks.
Aimee?
I think the most important ideas in Glorious Boy swirl around this concept of attunement. And it's attunement not just between mothers and their children, between marital partners and spouses, but also between cultures. And I often find that some of the secondary characters often sneak up on you and basically articulate exactly what the book is about. And sometimes, often you're finished with the book before you realize it. And that's exactly what happened in this case, when a couple of people have asked me this idea of the idea that you want to take away from the book. And I realized that this character who enters the story late in the game says it. He says, the most difficult thing is to remember that the enemy is human, but this is also the most important, especially when we are our own worst enemies. So I think that kind of encapsulates the most important idea in the book that I would like readers to take away, is this idea that we have to get past casting each other as enemies because we don't understand each other, and remember that we all have humanity in common. And that when we view ourselves as our own worst enemies, which Claire does quite often in this book, it is her humanity that is going to save her. And so that's what I would say.
Well, I think these are good ideas to end on, because I think that for all of us kind of on lockdown, I think that it is a good question to think about. Where do we belong? Is it where you are right now? Mm-hmm. Or when you get out of here, are you going to find another place where you actually belong? And I think the other question is, who is your own best self and who do you belong with? Mm-hmm. What I find myself thinking about a lot during this time of COVID is, what is the next great big novel I'm going to write? And I'm sure the two of you are thinking about that as well, because I feel like great stories and great narratives are simmering during this time. But right now, I hope that everyone who's watching this is thinking about buying this book, both of these books, and are thinking about booking you guys for readings and book clubs and virtual events all over the country. Thank you so much, all of you, for tuning in to this wonderful afternoon with us. Please buy Glorious Boy and Tea by the Sea. And thank you both so much for being with us. Thank you. This is amazing. Great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Kate and Donna.
Thanks.